Welcome to the 1CA podcast. This is your host, Jack Gaines. 1CA is a product of the Civil Affairs Association and brings in people who are current or former military, diplomats, development officers, and field agents to discuss their experiences on ground with the partner nation's people and leadership. Our goal is to inspire anyone interested in working the last 3 feet of foreign relations. To contact the show, email us at capodcasting@gmail.com or look us up on the Civil Affairs Association website at www.civilaffairsassoc.org. I'll have those in the show note. And a quick shout out to LC38 brand. They're offering 10% off for 1CA podcast fans. The promo code is 1CA10. LC38 brand has a little bit of everything for the international adventurer. So check out their website at lc38brand.com. I'll have the promo code and the address in the show notes. Today, we welcome Captain Daniel Moriarty, Professor John Melkon, and Captain Tommy Daniel to talk about Westpoint's Center for the Study of Civil Military Operations and the exciting new programs for students to learn CMO within the school and abroad. They also requested that I add that their comments are their own and do not officially represent any institution or organization. So let's get started. Since we have 3 people, can you do me a favor and voice in your name so that when I'm editing later, I have them correct?
Sorry, was that for me?
This is going to be for everybody, Captain. Let's start with you.
So there's 2 cabs on the line.
Oh, boy.
Sorry. Captain Tommy Daniel.
Okay. Captain Tommy Daniel, are you an instructor?
No, sir. I'm a data team lead for Special Operations Task Force under 1st Special Forces.
Oh, okay. You ever heard of Dave Maxwell?
The legendary man himself?
Yeah. I brought him in a couple times. You'll have to check out his episode. We went around the world on policy and then focused on the peaceful reunification of Korea. So it was a good show.
David was my battalion commander for 30 days, although I was largely on clearing duty at the time. So.
Oh, okay. So it wasn't a bad reason of 30 days.
No. He came in to replace our battalion commander just as I was PCSing from Okinawa.
Oh, okay. Yeah, usually if they say 30 days for me, or if I say it's 30 days, it's because of other reasons. I'm usually like pulling up the carpet.
Usually noticed,
yeah.
Right?
Yeah. All right. So Captain Moriarty, do you want to give me a little intro and background?
Yeah, Captain Dan Moriarty. I'm a new instructor here in the Department of Geography and Environmental Engineering at the United States Military Academy. And I also serve as the executive officer for the Center for the Study of Civil Military Operations.
Okay. And is that physical geography or is that human geography?
So, yes.
Yes.
I did my graduate school research on human geography, and I actually majored in human geography as a cadet here. I graduated about 10 years ago, but I will be teaching physical as well. So I'm having to hit the books, a little bit of a learning process.
Oh, I think you should get a grant and just travel all over the world and then study the weather on site. Don't do it this way. It's much better that way.
Yeah, that's a nice segue, too, because that's effectively what I do. So John Melkon, professor of geography here at the Academy. I teach the geography of the Middle East and North Africa and lecture in the geography of Sub-Saharan Africa. I'm also the director for the Center for the Study of Civil Military Operations. I'm a retired Special Forces officer, as well as served many years as a civilian operations officer for the Department of Defense before coming here 11 years ago to start and direct this program.
How you liking it?
Well, at the front end, I said I'd stay here for 3. Shortly thereafter, due to a down economy and shrinking budgets, I said my mission wasn't fulfilled, so I'd remain for 5. And then I stopped giving annual notices on that a number of years ago, which has got me, again, over the decade mark and probably not dying anytime soon in this seat.
Okay. Well, that's kind of cool. That's exciting. And so are you the person that started tying in human geography with physical geography? Where did that concept come from?
The center that I am directing was founded and placed here in the Department of Geography, and thus I was subsumed into the faculty here. So again, I think I bring a somewhat of a different perspective by not being a classical geographer. And I would argue when I came here that I was somewhat of a, not a critic necessarily, but I came to realize in my SF career and virtually everything that I'd done, the importance of it. And once I began to become a little bit more concerned and focused on the geopolitics side of it, I realized its absolute importance for our cadets.
Oh, cool. You know, I was just talking to John Casara, and he was talking about the importance of culture in geography. We were calling it cultural scent or cult scent because the importance of knowing the human geography, but kind of their cultural ties in between in order to better navigate and understand those people. So it sounds like you're kind of delving into that world. That's really cool.
Yes, we are. And I would argue synthesis is indeed CMO in so many ways.
Sure. Because we struggle often when soldiers go overseas, or diplomats or field agents in a lot of ways, by not being connected with the populations. How do we get past transactional relationships with partner nations and into actual full-blown relationships where our partners are embedded as much as we are in partner nation stability and building international relations and that whole expanded universe?
I would concur with that. And of course, at the risk of the paradigm that every old man will tell you it used to be better the way it was. I was raised as an SF officer and in a time of relative peace.
Right.
Went through the selection and training and everything else in the late 90s prior to 9/11. And so we were still working on the classic old edicts of special operations, which included the cultural familiarization and the cross-cultural competence, the language skills and all of those. And then understanding, having been, a part of it from inception, we had to push a lot of that to the side out of expediency for training, acquisitions, and the ability to put out a force, many of which we've tooled, refocused, and got more into direct action instead of the classic FID and the other areas under the UW umbrella that we excelled at for so many years. But arguably now it's more important than ever as we're looking at large-scale peer, near-peer competition, intractable combat, and other things. We really got to sort of get back to that. I won't use that as a condemnation of the community now, but it's just going to be interesting. The great, not necessarily an equalizer, but disruptor in all of this is the innovation side of it, in particular with regard to technology.
Sure.
But as I've been told by people like David Petraeus, who always reminded me when I used to talk to him on conversations of big data applications and machine learning and everything else, he said, that's all fine, that's all well to get educated, John, but just remember, it better be a human that's making the decision on the ground with another human. So you can't lose all of that.
Right.
One of the courses in the Department of Geography here that's required for all cadets, regardless of major, is the physical geography course. And towards the end of it, there's a block where we introduce the ideas of human geography and cultural geography. And, the intent behind teaching all these cadets those ideas isn't that we're going to produce 1,000 CA officers or foreign service officers every year, but the idea is that if you're an infantry lieutenant going to Poland on a rotation, that's not your first time ever considering that people have different cultures, their politics, their communities, all those things that I think come kind of second nature, those of us in the interagency. So yeah, I think it sounded really good in the department here with how we try to get after the natural and human environment.
Fantastic.
When I was a rising senior at Westpoint, that's my first introduction through Mr. Melkon, the center, to, interagency partners. So we did an event, where I got to meet folks that had worked with the UN, that had run nonprofits. I think that experience and that kind of understanding was invaluable. Became an infantry platoon leader in Germany, and then deployed to Ukraine, did a bunch of different training exercises and kind of interacting with population in Eastern Europe. As a conventional officer, none of that was covered in IBOLIC, none of that was covered in Ranger School. But at the end of the day, I found myself in Eastern Europe trying to assure our allies that, we were committed, we were there, and then, win support of the people, that the United States was a reliable and consistent partner through NATO. So it was great to have that at West Point. And the fact that we continue that with, regionally aligned forces, deploying brigade combat teams throughout the world, I think having the center there strategically positioned to train rising second lieutenants, kind of show them the world, so to speak, and all the big picture and the actors that make it a better place, and then be able to work with them is vital.
Do you have an example of that?
Yes. I met a development worker through CSCMO and West Point named, Miss Walsh. And the thing that I kind of understood from that engagement was kind of the vital role that matriarchal kind of society and, ways of life that you could take from kind of development for working specifically women-specific programs and development. So when I deployed a civil affairs team into Moldova as a cross-functional team leader and special operations liaison element to Moldova, I took that forward. One of our first projects was the border of Dniester, the breakaway region of Transnistria and Moldova. And then we met with the hospital administration chief. She was also the primary doctor in that little region. We've focused on kind of some of her problem sets of how we could increase societal resiliency in in that region. And one of them was a way that the medical device to identify ovarian cancer. They didn't have one, so they have to drive a couple hours to Chisinau, the capital of Moldova, to get screened for cancer. We worked with Spirit of America, calling Denny, got a colposcope donated. We were also able to support her through some other kind of planning, emergency planning, and basically just our ability to support. I think having that connection to CSMEO and identifying kind of a different lens from which to view support to the population. And I think that was like super helpful because now, women in that region, don't have to travel 2 hours. And I think it was a great win for the United States and Moldova and to highlight our partnership.
And that's a really great example of coming in and finding a problem to solve and how you as an agent of the U.S. working on ground can forward foreign affairs.
100%, right? Like, civil affairs. I mean, that's our bread and butter, non-civil affairs, U.S. forces deployed, and they want to work with DACA or some other military operations and outreach. Having the center there and having lessons learned like that, Ms. Walsh, will enable them to do the exact same thing without a 2-year pipeline and other stuff in between.
Right. And how is your work with First Soft? Are they understanding where you're coming from with the civil affairs aspects?
I think definitely all across the RSOF spectrum, due to great power competition, there is an increased focus in the human domain. Mm-hmm. And I think we're exploring the projects and research and from the operational side of the house, being able to take some of those lessons learned. I think we're definitely in a good direction for using data and analytics to sense and understand the information and geospatial environment.
Okay. Tommy, that's really great. Dan or John, do you want to introduce CSCMO a little bit and give a little background for people?
Sure, I'll go ahead and do that. And I think even the question you asked me earlier about the being nested within geography and where that is, you can talk about the sort of decision side on that, but I think Danny will be great as a young faculty member who's now applying his trade here to incorporate the CA attitude, understanding everything else and why it's relevant here. So I came here in 2012. The center was formed on a gift, the GPD Charitable Trust, whose founder was a former civil affairs officer. He had experienced as a activated reserve civil affairs officer, contributing to the operations in Iraqi freedom. He often tells a vignette about being there in the first days when the Corps commander and General McNeil was talking a little bit about how the 18th Airborne Corps was going to go in and topple the country and then shortly thereafter reestablish order and other things. He talked about a young officer that asked something about sort of the quintessential, what next question, and felt that, in many ways we had a tremendous amount of capability to invade and occupy the country, but we really did not incorporate a lot of the lessons learned in previous conflicts over many years. We had handled post-war occupations in countries like Germany, countries like Japan, countries like the Philippines, countries like Italy. Contrast that with sort of a resounding peace in Korea into a continual decline in the aftermath of Vietnam. But even in Vietnam, there are tremendous lessons there. Early on, we featured some of the members of CORDS under Bob Comer and some of the other great interagency programs that were instituted. So all of these sort of historical elements were sort of enshrined in the thought process that he had and then brought to me when we decided to begin to develop the center and landed here at Westpoint for its implementation. And so when I arrived here, I looked at the curriculum and thought to myself, okay, how can we get to these topics, many of which are strategic in nature with CMO, many of which don't get introduced into a curriculum until perhaps they're going off to CGSC or ILE or some other junior field grade applications. But arguably, we were learning on the ground, either by hook or by crook, as junior leaders within these countries as we occupied them. And that was all the classic quintessential interagency / sort of spectrum of power that's required to engage. And that's how do you work with IGOs? How do you work with NGOs? How do you work with the host nation? How do you work with the local populace? How do you work with public sector, private sector elements that are there and seek favorable outcomes? And so that's a huge mandate, right? So I thought to myself, how can I distill this down? And I worked closely with a lot of support from our department head at the time, Brigadier General Wiley Thompson, as well as by my cohort, Colonel Andy Lohman, who was my co-director for the geography program. Sort of collectively, we thought to ourselves, okay, it's hard to impact on the curriculum here at West Point. There's a finite amount of time and an infinite amount of demand for things that were going on. So the way we organized things was into a 4-pillar model. And the first pillar we call symposia and sharing, is we looked at how can we run a conference that can sort of capture these lessons. And so that eventually evolved into our student workshop for civil military operations. We hold that every year, try and do that on a topic of contemporary relevance, as well as, again, look historically at other things. We try and bring in people across that entire span of operational inputs to a complex operations. Aid, state, NGOs, IGOs, various others that come in, as well as the members of the civil affairs community from 95th CA, as well as the reserves that contribute over the years. So I think that event sort of encapsulates the symposium sharing piece. The other part of our 4 pillars was scholars and speakers. We realized that if you can't run an entire course on this topic, then you can bring in thought leaders. We've relied on a lot of thought leaders across the spectrum, civil affairs officers, people from PKSOI, people from USAID, people from the United States Institute of Peace, and various others that have come in. And then we've been able to farm them across the curriculum in other departments and other classes in order to be able to have a positive effect. And we've done that with social sciences. We've done that with engineering disciplines. We've done that with cyber. We've done that with security studies and various other programs. Another piece that we have, that is our summer internships. Here we call them individual advanced development, AAIDs.
Of course, it's the military. We can't say something.
Absolutely, right?
You got to use 5.
Internships is far too understandable, far too clear. We got to clutter it with an acronym. With our internships, we've sent them out to a number of different places. Again, I just mentioned some of those organizations previously, USIP. I put them in every single combatant command, as well as usually at the Army component of that. I've sent them to 7 continents over that time. We've actually had one go down to the International Station in Antarctica over the years. We've sent hundreds of them. And it's an opportunity, again, for them to not only just sort of take the lessons that they learned within the prior pillars, but then apply them in a practical sense when they're out there within the field. And then also part of that, too, is a cadet club, which Tommy was the founding member of. And that club organizes things like spring break trips. We've sent them over the years to Haiti. We've sent them to South Africa. We've sent them to Uganda. We've sent them to the Netherlands. We've sent them to Germany. We've sent them to the Philippines, Hawaii, again, to immerse themselves into an environment where they can begin to see CMO in practice. And then the last piece is that we formed a course. I mentioned earlier that the quickest way to get to effect, we believed, was to go ahead and work across the disciplinary environment. We continue to do that with targeted speakers. But then here within the department, we were able to create a curriculum. And we have a course, which in the civil affairs vernacular, we're calling 438. The number was available, and I took it. I jumped on it. So EV 438 is the colloquium on civil military operations. If we take a complex operation, we break that down into a case study on a number of different ways that they'll see that they, as future platoon leaders or JMOs in general, or just military officers, because it's scalable all the way up to senior ranks, would be engaging with a lot of these different actors on the field and everything else. And so that 4 pillars environment, we organized that early. We've been able to work around it. We've shrunk. We've expanded in certain areas within that for opportunity and for supply and demand purposes. But we still rely on that heavily as a clear means to be able to demonstrate how we can bring the best education, training, and inspiration to the cadets while they're here.
What kind of reactions have you seen from the students? Are they getting a real spark from it? Are they curious? Is it drawing them in? Are they following up? What are you seeing as a result of the program?
2 cases in point that resonate in my mind. We had a cadet who participated in the student workshop on civil military operations who ended up calling up from Fort Campbell, Kentucky as a platoon leader for her MP company and was suddenly placed in Monrovia, Liberia on the Ebola response. All right, so we're talking a non-kinetic environment, although an environment that had its own security challenges. We're talking an environment of fear. We're talking an environment of austerity, an environment of challenge. And she reached back to us afterwards and said, you know what? All I had to do was go back to the relationships that I'd made, some of the principles that I understood about how to apply CMO in that environment. She described in detail about how she was able to go ahead and educate her company commander. You know what we need to do, sir, first? We need to go find out where Médecins Sans Frontières is. We need to go find out where the UN is right now. We need to go find out where other private NGOs, which could range from the International Committee of the Red Cross right down to 2 men or 2 women in a truck,
right,
and figure out what they're doing right now and how we can go ahead to work with them in order to synthesize our efforts, achieve favorable outcomes for both sides and other things. And she actively did that. I mean, organized a number of different responses that helped to cut through much of the difficulties that often occur in those environments. When you don't know who's who in the zoo, you don't know how your efforts either can complement one another or contradict one another. And I count that as sort of a blessing of there's one that sort of learned and understood.
Did her boss respond well to it? Did it go okay? Did he tell her to go sit in the back and color?
No, right? In this case, it was well received.
Good.
And she had, I don't know all the details, but, from her point of view or whatever else, to not only understand the viewpoints, this is all cross-culture, it's not just limited to language in foreign countries or international scope.
Right.
How do we understand a little bit about the needs of our junior leaders? How do we understand about their skills, their effectiveness? Tommy and I go back and forth all the time. He calls me an old man or a dinosaur whenever I'm trying to relate something on a computer or with regard to technology. And
back when Nixon was here.
Righteousness in that. Yeah, stay away from the machine, old man. What I'm getting at is that if leaders are open to the changing dynamics, the introduction of intrusive elements like technology, and understanding how effective those things can be, then you're going to have success. And in her case, it did work out that way. She talked about how she was able to organize working groups, represent at that junior level, because she's the one that went out and made the relationship. She knew who to go to, she knew what to do, and she made it happen.
Made her boss look like $1 million too.
Yeah, in fact, I would love to recommend her to you for another conversation, if possible, because I think, again, it's a really great example of how our junior leaders are demonstrating a very larger mindset than perhaps was even evident in my day and or what is demanded of us, certainly, in the coming years.
Cool. I have a dozen questions for you on your travels, but I feel like I've totally ignored Dan Moriarty, who actually organized this whole thing. Dan, are you around, or have you fallen asleep or given up and thrown your coffee mug on the ground?
No, I mean, hey, as a state professional, Joel, about just getting people in the room, right around the table.
So what impressions have you had so far from the discussion?
My main feeling is regret that Cadet Moriarty 10 years ago didn't know about the center's existence. In the short time I've been here, I've had people already approach me asking about civil affairs. I've had to slow them down and say, hold on, let's get past Bullock first. Get past be a good platoon leader before you worry about putting your packet in. But I mean, it's great. It's really inspiring to see how motivated these young men and women are.
All right, cool. Well, so do you have any last thoughts on today's discussion?
Jack, let me jump in here right now too, quick, because as you've seen, we've talked a little bit. There's a bit of an evolution here, right? From John de Blasio and the GPD Trust as our founding donor, and his experiences in CMO. My own experiences as an SF officer and the way in which I performed humanitarian assistance operations, counter drug operations, various other things that fall outside the spectrum of direct action, on to Tommy's inspiration piece there and his own vignettes about things that are going on. And now Dan has opened the door, if you will, for a discussion about peers and other things that are going on. But part of this whole evolution is that Dan, in his role now as a future XO, we're intending to leverage that, his own experience, his own future research to do that. I think he's got a pretty good breadth and depth of understanding in his own research in Africa that he could share that, once again, not only demonstrates the civil affairs nexus to the CMO world and how that's derived, but now how it's returning to the classroom, turning out the next generation of leaders in CMO.
All right. So thanks a bunch. I appreciate your time. I see people are running off, so.
Well, thanks again, Jack.
Jack. Thanks so much.
Yeah.
No problem.
Yeah, this has been awesome. Thank you so much.
Yeah, it was a good time. So, all right, I'm out. I'll talk to you soon. Thanks for listening. If you get a chance, please like and subscribe and rate the show on your favorite podcast platform. Also, if you're interested in coming on the show or hosting an episode, email us at capodcasting@gmail.com. And thank you again to LC38 Brand for offering 10% off to our listeners. We've been nominated for the People's Choice Awards, and this is a little extra treat for those who made it happen. Again, the code is 1CA10 and the site is lc38brand.com. And now, most importantly, to those currently out in the field, working with a partner nation's people or leadership to forward U.S. relations, thank you all for what you're doing. This is Jack, your host. Stay tuned for more great episodes. 1CA Podcast.